Mario García Torres is a character, maybe. It started to be a character. At some point in my life, I realized that it became a character. It is a character that I cannot control. When you start doing work out there, you start giving glimpses of things, but those things get interpreted by multiple sources of interpretation. So that becomes just a kind of blurry identity. And so sometimes I try to come back and try to rethink who I am and I reveal against those reads and come back. But it's very, very difficult to control. But I mean, if you ask me, I don't know, Mario García Torres is an artist. He was born in the north of Mexico. He studied art and has never thought of anything else than doing art, and he's very lucky to be able to do that. I hope it's engaging. These are all hopes, you know. When you're doing an artwork, the only thing you can do is hope. I mean, it's just a leap of faith, you know. There's no way to make anything certain, and I think I like that. I like that sort of uncertainty of things. You're throwing ideas out, but you don't know where they're going to be, and so I like that. Maybe uncertainty should be a word, engaging maybe other, and I hope it's not pretentious. I've used many mediums. I feel I mean, once in a while I doubt about things. I mean, all the time I doubt, but sometimes I get carried away. But I try most of the times when I start a work, when I start an idea, when I start an exhibition, I try to start from scratch. And that is what has led me maybe to create works in many different mediums. You know, like I've done paintings or sculptures, but also installations that include videos or objects or things that move, mechanic things. And you know, I enjoy a lot doing theater pieces, just because the rush of being on stage or directing somebody on stage is really interesting. But sometimes it doesn't make sense, you know. So you have to, every time you have to think of what you want to communicate, and then what is the best medium to do that. And so that's how things are decided, I guess. We're doing some new works that are paintings. They're very straightforward, informational paintings. Well, they're not straightforward, but they're not brushes around. They're very kind of informational, maybe. I don't know if that word exists. There's also an empty room, which I'm really looking forward to see. It's an empty room that only has one very modest object in the floor. On the floor, it's a jewel. It's a piece of gold, and it's a letter that it's a word that says Carmen, and Carmen, it's a character in a cumbia song that was very important, made in the 80s here in Mexico. And the story in the song tells the story that somebody has lost a chain with the name Carmen. And when people come to Kassel, I hope that they come into the room and then suddenly they will find this chain that was lost in Mexico in the 80s. Well, Falling Together in Time is a piece that it's probably the most bizarre essay I've made. It's a story that starts from a song called Jump, titled Jump, by the band Van Halen, the American band Van Halen. And at some point in my life, I started to make an essay about, I didn't know where I was going, where it was going to end. I was trying to make an essay about liminal moments. And at some point I realized that a number of music bands had made the greatest hit and then disbanded afterwards. And that's how I started to get into the story of this band and this song in specific, when they did Jump, which became their greatest hit. And I started to realize that there was a number of coincidences like that. And then the idea of coincidence started to become visible. So I started to think like what was happening the same year, in the same place, somebody had made an action that had led to something else. But all this is to tell you that the stories that get picked they're not a capricious way of picking the stories that I want to tell, but it's more about sort of digging into connecting things in a strange way, and then stories suddenly suggest themselves, and if it makes sense, I try to arrange them. It's an essay that is so weird. I think it's in part is weird because I think it's mainly research in a very superficial way through like Wikipedia. So I think it's revealing in that sense of how we live and how we approach knowledge. Because what happens in Wikipedia is that Wikipedia sort of flattens all type of knowledge. Pop culture and philosophy and whatever, all types of things get packed in one place. And that's how this piece is made. When I started thinking about this exhibition, I thought to me it's very interesting to have a second show in the same place where I had shown. It's not only the coincidence, the fact that I will show in the same place, which have happened before, but the fact that this had been a very important exhibition for myself. And it's Documenta it's an exhibition that maybe puts a lot of pressure. It's an exhibition that is seen by a lot of people, is something that is very respected in the art world. So when you get invited to Documenta, you really have to think what you will do and try to think that that's something important or something. So I think that the experience for me as an artist, and I hope that, and I think it is, I think I'm not mistaken, I think that all those things that you see in a Documenta are things that stay in your mind, are things that get discussed through years. And so one important thing for me was not only to make a gesture towards what I had shown there, but also to think about memory and what stays with you when you see an art exhibition, and how those things become sort of part of the echo of your thinking. When you go to a museum and you confront an artwork, you might get a chunk of the information that is given to you right in front of you, but also you, as we were just saying before, you are consuming that information through your mood, through the political situation that is happening right outside the museum. And one of other things like that is the memory of what you have seen in the same space. And I hope that somehow we've made a few gestures through the exhibition in order to hopefully try to sort of feed my exhibition with many more images and memories of what people have seen there before. And one of them, there's a gesture of what I've done. In fact, that collaboration, that piece that I show in document 13 was the end of a very long story. I sometime in the early 2000s, I got invested in researching a story that had to do with Alighiero Boetti, an artist from Italy, from the Arte Povera movement. Sometime in the 1970s, early 70s, he established a hotel in Afghanistan, in Kabul. And this story was always told in the same way. I was always intrigued why this artist had established a hotel so far away. At least for me, it was such a faraway place. And exotic in a way, a place that I didn't have much information about. And I was always intrigued, and little by little I started to do research. I did a number of works. One main work was a slideshow, which will be part of the show. It's called Alguna Vez. It's called, Have You Ever Seen the Snow? It's called in English. And it's a piece made out of stills that I grabbed on the internet through years. And because at the time when I was doing this, Afghanistan was a war zone, and I couldn't think that an artist would go there. So I decided to look for this place. The artist very smartly had said that the hotel, which was in fact a house, was not a hotel as you normally imagine, had exploded in the Soviet invasion in the late 70s. And it turns out it was not true. So at some point I realized that this place must be alive, must be standing. And so I started to look through other people's pictures. I started to put together a map of the center of Kabul to try to figure out how to find this place. So finding a place from far away, to me was very important. And this piece ends with the fact that we know that this place exists, and I commissioned a local photographer to go there and take a picture of this place. This was shown in Kassel, and it will be shown now in the exact same place in Kassel in the Fridericianum. But also, what this triggered, the idea of this piece, I had made it already before my Documenta project started. And when I told the story to Caroline Christopher-Kargiev, which was the curator of that Documenta, she immediately said, we should just fly into Kabul. And I totally forgot all my ethical problems. I said, of course, let's go tomorrow, anytime. And so we ended up going there and started to think of the possibility of extending this Documenta that always happens in Kassel to extend it also into Kabul. So we went there, and she also invited other artists. So part of that Documenta also happened in Kabul. And I tell you that my contribution to the show was the last part, because the last part of that research ended up in us renting the house that once hosted the Italian guy's hotel. And we realized when we got possession of it, we realized that the house had a lot of problems, had engineering problems, and was a little bit run down. So throughout the year that we had it, we repaired it, we fixed it, we took care of it, which was the most important. Conceptually, the most important part was to take care. We remade the garden, and when the exhibition Documenta ended that day, we returned the keys to whoever said at the time was the owner, and we let it go. The work is a video, it's an animation made out of cutouts of photographs. Those photographs I found them in an archive some years ago. Very specifically, it's in the archive of Harold Cement, which is a very important curator, and he also curated one of the most important Documentas, Documenta 5 in 1972, I think. And Mario Merzi is also another Italian artist, also part of the Arte Povera. And sometimes I love going into archives and looking at things and thinking of stories that we are not told in mainstream history. And at some point during those years, 2 or 3 years, I happened to go to 2 or 3 different archives, and I realized that there was the same character, Mario Merz, which was an artist I knew and I appreciate. I realized that there was pictures of him dancing every time. And I started asking, why is he dancing? And everybody said, like, well, he was a great dancer. He had died by the time. And they said, well, he was a great dancer. So at some point I found in Harold Simon's archive, that is now in Los Angeles, a number of pictures of him dancing, very specifically in a bar in Kassel during the installation of Documenta 5. So I worked with my friend Pablo, who's an animator. I said, like, can we imagine how was Mario Merz dancing? So we cut out 4 or 5 photographs that we had found and put them together and make him dance. So that's the first thing that you see in the show. When you will come into the show, the first thing you will see is a big projection of Mario Merz dancing in Kassel, and that's partly why we thought it was important to include that piece. in the show. When you contribute something to an exhibition, you want to be aware of everything that's happened before in that same place or afterwards. You know, of course, the first thing I did was to reread everything about the documenta, who had invented this and how it has developed through the decades, and I realized that, I mean, documenta has an incredibly important story. It was established by Arnold Bode, who had the idea of, after the war, Kassel was very much destroyed, and they wanted to use art to uplift the town and the people, and they created documenta for that. And it was modern times, so most of the works that you see in the photographs of the time, they're modern paintings and modern sculptures. And when I was working on Documenta 13, I was really aware of many things that they had done, which were absolutely beautiful gestures to be able to create a show in a destroyed Fridericianum museum. And some of the things that they used were sort of funny metal pieces that help hang paintings, and there were some beautiful curtains that in the photographs now they look absolutely amazing, and they used them just because there was no walls, or they had to divide the space in a cheap way, and so they use sort of things that will normally you don't use in a museum today. They were things that look way more domestic than you will think, you know, like same way that in the 50s they had plants in museums, which today is like, no museum will have a plant. But at the time there was something very domestic and beautiful, and very intimate. And so for this exhibition I wanted to have a gesture towards that. And so we will have some curtains and some hangings that are sort of a homage to that Bode's show. I don't know how many people are around, the people who saw that show. I think it's early 50s. Maybe you experienced the show, maybe you just saw it on a photograph, but all this blurriness I'm really interested in bringing there. And also, I think what happens is that even if I might create a piece that is full information, I think that if you see it through that mediation and that blurriness, then it becomes a fiction and becomes a space where you can project yourself and allow myself to be a little bit more in the background, which is great. Well, Choco is a character that I invented several years ago. It was made after my participation in Documenta. I sort of allowed myself to create some kind of off year. I tried to not have any commitments for a year because I was extremely not only tired. There was a lot of pressure and a lot of it was a difficult political position when we started to discuss the idea of bringing Documenta to a war zone. All this created a lot of awareness, political awareness. What's going to happen? The journalists are going to come and they're going to say this and that. So this created a lot of pressure, intellectual pressure, let's say. So I was a little bit tired, and I said, you know, I should rethink my work in some way. It was very important to bring ethics into that exhibition, just to think, what are we allowed to make an exhibition like that in a war zone? What happens? We had a lot of questions when we were there. It was immediately we realized that it was a great idea, because people in a war zone like that, when some foreigner comes into a place like that, they were so happy to talk about more meaningful things than their immediate context, which was military and whatever, and this kind of so loud thing, which is war. And I realized I could maybe figure out the way to say no to every proposal that I get through a year. And then after some months of trying to not do anything and trying to rethink everything, I realized that I actually had a commitment, and I was a show in my gallery in Japan. And I thought, okay, what's the least I can do for that exhibition, and how I'm going to reflect this moment in my life in that exhibition. So I created this story. In fact, it's a kid's story, which has a character named Choco, the kid who loved being bored. What I actually just wanted was to kind of have a clean slate and not think about anything, because I was sure that if I managed to do that, then something interesting was going to come, and it was going to be different in my life. So conceptual art taught us of saying what you think, but at some point in my life I realized it was a lie. It's way more interesting to have people be in the first place. The artwork should not be ever the most important object in the room. It's always people, and it's always people's thoughts, and the way that ideas and communication leave a gallery, and by the time you tell the first person out there what you saw, and that person tells it to somebody else, all that misconception and misinterpretation is way richer than what I could do. So I think that's what I hope it happens. It comes from the idea that, first of all, the idea that art is not a solo thing. Art is something that even though you sign works, you claim works, at the end of the day, what you see is actually mass things of everything that influence you. And when my first idea when I started thinking about what am I going to do, what that character Mario García Torres will do in the context of Kassel and the Fridericianum, I thought there was something quite interesting about the fact that there was a connection. I guess that's my optimism. There was a connection through music of what I grew up hearing, which was popular music in Mexico and Germany. And now this music that I started hearing, which was very local, now more and more becomes a world music. It's music that now became corridos tumbados or whatever, and that has developed into a type of music that people hear everywhere in the world. And I thought that was really interesting to think that I had grown through that, but not only that, but that had connected me to Germany, because I mean it's a long story, but there was a group of Germans that came into Mexico and brought here the accordion, and the accordion became part of the marches, march music and band music, and that became norteña, and I can tell you a long story, but there's that hopeful view of the world, and I thought, why don't we see the world as that, as a kind of beautiful world, even though we are in a very complex situation right now in the world. I think there is many ways to hear ourselves and recognize ourselves. So that's how I started to think of potentially creating this room, which all music in the world is influence each other. When you hear something, or when you see a work, or you experience something, you're not hearing one person, but you're hearing actually a community, a group of people, a community, a city, a country, whatever, and more than any time in our history, we are connected everywhere. So I really love the idea that now music is way more mixed and complex and has elements from every other things, and all those things get connected also back to the idea of memory and history, and how that sort of weird place that you as an individual have in a complex cultural production. And influence is something I think that we now talk a lot because there's the influencers or whatever, but I think that it's something very beautiful and very subtle that we that we're doing all the time with each other. And I think it's really beautiful when you sit down and people say something, maybe something very simple, and that becomes part of your thought process, and then you make up something out of that. And I think we don't realize that, and I hope that, and that's, I think, in a way, it's a metaphor for how art works. Throughout the years, I'm less and less interested in people knowing what I think, and I'm more interested in people doing something with what I think or what I say. And I think that it's very important for me. I've been working on having more collaborators and always sort of trying to challenge myself to not be myself and have the work be a sort of more collective effort in a way. And so I hope that comes through in many different ways, and I hope that influence and time and memory and all those things sort of back that perception of the work.